quoting from the Commission, the term forensic science encompasses a broad range of forensic disciplines, each with its own set of technologies and practices. In other words, there's a wide variability across forensic science disciplines with regard to techniques, methodologies, reliability, types and numbers of potential errors, research, general acceptability, and published material. Disparities in forensic scientific community. There are great disparities among existing forensic science operations in the federal, state, and local law enforcement jurisdictions and agencies. True with respect to funding, access to analytical instrumentation, the availability of skill and well-trained personnel, certification, accreditation, and oversight. And so what we really have is a kind of patchwork of hit or miss, in which some experts are very good, some experts are not very good. Some crime labs are better funded, some crime labs are less well funded. And particularly in the kind of climate of what's taken place with DNA evidence, again, over the course of the last several decades, greater and greater pressure upon those kind of labs to turn around results quickly, to produce results quickly rather than necessarily accurately under those circumstances. Lack of mandatory standardization, certification, and accreditation. The fragmentation problem is compounded because operational principles and procedures for many forensic science disciplines are not standardized or embraced either between or within your jurisdictions. There is no uniformity in the certification of forensic practitioners or in the accreditation of crime laboratories. Indeed, most jurisdictions do not require forensic practitioners to be certified, and most forensic science disciplines have no mandatory certification programs. Moreover, accreditation of crime laboratories is not required in most jurisdictions. So again, no standard protocols, no oversight, simply a circumstance in which the labs and the practitioners provide their best expert wisdom in those kind of cases. Problems relating to the interpretation of forensic evidence. Often in criminal prosecutions and civil litigation, forensic evidence is offered to support conclusions, again, about this issue of individualization, the matching of a particular specimen to a particular individual or other source, or about classification of the source of the specimen into one of several categories. With the exception of nuclear DNA analysis, however, no forensics method has been rigorously shown to have the capacity to consistently and with a high degree of certainty demonstrate a connection between evidence and a specific individual or source. Let me repeat that last part. Exception of DNA, no forensics method has been rigorously shown to have the capacity to consistently and with a high degree of certainty demonstrate a connection between evidence and a specific individual and source. And again, the contrast to this, of course, is that the individuals or the reports that are issued to the courts are often presented in this context of the CSI effect, this kind of notion that this is scientific evidence. We have professionals that are operating in that kind of capacity providing that, who often will testify that there is a match, there is a definitive match, there is a high degree of accuracy in terms of what they find in those circumstances.
So is that even true for fingerprint evidence?
It is.
And for if a certain gun was used in a certain crime.
Yes. Yeah. And again, I mean, to balance things, I don't think the Academy is saying that, well, I'll reverse myself. The Academy doesn't say how widespread that problem is or how widespread the error is. And the problem is we really have no way of knowing how widespread that problem is, except in those kind of cases in which traditionally DNA is now exonerating those kind of circumstances. And I mean, that gets us a little bit afield of things. But we largely operate in a kind of system of criminal justice in which there's a high degree of trust between the professionals within that process. And although we typically think of issues related to the presumption of innocence and a system constitutionally that's based in terms of providing due process and rights for the accused under those circumstances. In large part, those rights and that due process operates within the broader context in which, for the working professionals within the system, they believe they've got the right guy. They believe the system is operating correctly. By the time someone has gotten to the process of criminal trial, the kind of logic is a presumption of guilt. Police don't make mistakes. If police do make mistakes, then prosecutors catch those mistakes. By the time it gets to the criminal trial process, there is real evidence suggesting that this person did the crime, and we simply play out the kind of adversarial game of seeing whether or not that takes place in terms of a finding or a verdict of guilt or innocence. And last kind of point in terms of that, of course, remember that in the criminal court, it's the rare exception that cases actually go to trial. The vast majority of cases are settled by means of plea bargaining or some kind of guilty plea before it gets to the trial phase. So again, the kind of presumption is, yes, we've got the right person. Yes, this person is guilty. The only question is, what do we do with them? What should be the appropriate sentence under those kind of circumstances? And even the appellate process raises concern about catching those kind of errors. Yeah.
Yeah, your article talks a bit about, and I didn't get all the way through it either, but it talked about whether or not crime labs should be separate administratively and budgetarily from.
Right.
And I'm just curious what your opinion is on that, whether it's really practical or whether it's desirable.
I think it's desirable. Whether or not it's practical, we'll see. And I think again, the vote is kind of still out on those kind of issues. I believe it's Virginia. One state has, within the last couple of years, moved to an independent status in terms of those kind of crime labs. And the National Academy report calls for that autonomy or that independence under those circumstances. There's a lot of resistance, not surprisingly, from law enforcement under that regard, and particularly from the prosecutors, the National District Attorneys Association, which is largely the professional organization lobbying group on the other side in terms of those kind of issues, who argue that the issue is professionalization, and we have professional crime labs. If we don't find good results, if we don't find accurate results, it's because we've got too many cases, we don't have enough trained staff. Give us money, provide resources, we'll hire more staff, we'll be better at this, we'll improve things. But again, that's really a very different kind of argument than the fact that when these labs or when these experts operate contractually or under the domain of law enforcement, that there may be potential bias in terms of results. And again, I think, if you watch the CSI shows, think about, and I'm not sure there's been any studies on this, but think about how many cases in which the evidence is actually used to rule somebody out rather than rule somebody in terms of a suspect. And I think that portrayal, that it's the rare exception that kind of evidence really rules somebody out as it's portrayed in terms of TV, pretty well fits the reality in terms of how criminal justice operates as well. And the article, I won't take the time, but the article goes through some high visibility cases related to problems or errors that were made, including, I think it's a fingerprint analysis done by the FBI in terms of a gentleman that was accused in the Madrid bombings the year after 9/11. And FBI fingerprint analysis had said, here's your guy. And actually, it was only the Spanish authorities a couple of years later who came about and said, no, we've ruled him out. We've looked at the other kind of evidence and found that it's not a match here, and ruled in somebody else in the circumstances. So, and part of what the Academy criticizes, to be honest, is some of the, and how to put this delicately, the kind of high self-posture that the FBI particularly adopts in terms of that kind of sense, that we are the best, we don't make mistakes, that the evidence that we provide, maybe locals make some mistakes, but we operate in terms of the highest professional standards. The Academy says even that needs to be questioned in a place where we have no certification, no standards, no clear protocols that we agree upon.
I'm thinking in terms of medical mistakes and the review process when there's medical mistakes and accountability to review boards and that sort of thing. Is there any sort of track, and other than obviously a trial and appeal is a review process, is there any sort of tracking by any organization of these kinds of errors or potential errors and that sort of thing? No. Okay.
Not within the system. The two primary kind of means are, the three primary kind of means are, that's why there's an advocate in the adversarial process for the accused. That's why there's a defense attorney. And all the article didn't refer to it, which I found kind of interesting. I mean, looking around, we all are old enough to remember the famous trial of O.J. Simpson, the criminal trial that took place, and the role that forensics evidence played, or at least the way in which the forensics evidence was presented and collected in terms of the acquittal of Simpson. And the civil trial, of course, did find him legally responsible.